Hello everyone, it's Turin here with another Warhammer Total War online commentary. In this particular battle, I'll be playing Bretonnia, so definitely giving you guys a break from the greenskins and the dwarves and the chaos, which I've just been spamming for the past 2 weeks or so. So again, my apologies, and hopefully you guys will enjoy some Bretonnia. So as far as my army goes, I have King LOUEN here, who of course is just a staple, and the Sword of Corone is very, very good. Definitely a must-bring in my opinion. Providing the melee defense and armor debuff to opponents is pretty good against vampire counts. A lot of their lords, for example, Manfred, has about 80 armor, so it'll do something to him. And, you know, if you're in a big group of Graveguard and those type of things who are very heavily armored units, and I believe he actually has a few. It looks like some skeleton warriors kind of intermixed with Graveguard who do have 90 armor. It's really not a bad ability to have. So I also have him. I have two paladins who both are wielding potions of toughness. Then I also have Pegasus Knights. So I actually didn't bring any cav on the ground because I had been playing against a few vampire counts players who were kind of bringing a lot of Blood Knights against Bretonnia. And Blood Knights are so darn strong. They have anti-large, they have frenzy, armored shielded. Just a very resilient unit. So I decided to not try to play that traditional ground cav game and just went with a very, very strong Air Force in hopes of overpowering the Vampire Air Forceman, which shouldn't be too hard considering he just brought Manfred on the Hellsteed here. So he's going to be running around playing some Benny Hill for the next probably 20 minutes. And as far as my army goes, the rest of it, I do have a front line of men-at-arms with pole arms who are just absolutely amazing against vampire counts. Vampire counts tend to bring some monstrous units, not a lot, but they do have cryptors at their disposal, which are a very, very strong unit. And also they do have armor piercing, so against Graveguard, they're a very, very good option. They have extremely high melee defense at 40, which is great. So they have 40. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the Graveguard have. So Graveguard actually, those are skeleton warriors, and these guys actually have 36 melee defense. So they actually have higher melee defense than Graveguard for only 550 resources, which isn't bad at all. In the secondary line, I have a bunch of peasant bowmen, and these are just great units. I mean, even against heavily armored troops, I don't know, I feel like they're just so effective, more so than other archers. I don't know why it is. I think it might just be because you usually do bring a lot, so. And this was a bit more of a risky play. I did bring 3 trebuchets in hopes of just pounding down his Graveguard before the battle started. And it's a tough one because, you know, if he has some Vanguard units back here, like the Dire Pack or something like that, or, you know, any Fellbats, he can shut them down very easily. But I figured if I had a really strong Air Force with Pegasus Knights, I could protect them. But we'll see how it plays out. So as far as my opponent's army goes, he has a mixture of skeleton warriors, which aren't a bad choice. They're shielded and very, very good fodder units against Bretonnia. And then he also has Graveguard, kind of just back and forth there. So skeleton, Graveguard. Then he also has the Sternsmen, of course. Every vampire count army should have the Sternsmen. Just such a good unit. Then, of course, he brought some Cairn Wraiths, which is a bit interesting. But aside from Grail Knights, Bretonnia doesn't have a ton of magic damage, if any, really. I'm trying to think if they do. But yeah, Grail Knights would obviously run these guys over. But he kind of, planned for that. So if I did bring Grail Knights to counteract his Cairn Wraiths and other ethereal units, he would have the 2 Blood Knights to just beat them down. So very, very well played there in terms of the strategy. But, you know, they do have armor piercing, and they actually have 40 weapon strength, which isn't bad, and do cause terror. So among, you know, the peasant forces, they're going to wreak a little bit of havoc, and I see some good value in bringing a single group. So 2 skeleton warriors, 2 groups of blood knights, the White King over here, and then I think that's it for his army. I think I could have sworn he had some vanguarded units back here, but I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of that shortly. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I just basically, you know, I realized that he only had Manfred right now, and I had a huge Air Force advantage. So instead of chasing him around with everything, I decided to just send my paladins after Manfred, and the 2 paladins with potions should be able to handle him pretty well. So I just decided to crumble these skeleton warriors really quickly because they have extremely low leadership. You can see they're already down to 10, and when LOUEN lands, they go to negative 31. So they're going to start crumbling very quickly, and at the same time, my field trebuchets are bombarding the Graveguard, kind of softening things up a little bit. Hopefully no friendly fire going on here. But you can see they're already crumbling, which is great. Just one less unit I have to worry about. Because I figured, you know, I had a front line here, but he had a much wider spread, so I wanted to take the end off this side so that he couldn't envelop me and get around to my missile troops over here. But, you know, on that same note, it might have been a better choice to go after the Graveguard, but I figured I could just get rid of these guys really quick before the battle even started. So now my opponent is in the front line here. His Graveguard are taking a lot of missile fire here, but thankfully for my opponent, they are shielded and armored, so they're not going to take massive damage, but you can see the trebuchets are getting in there and doing pretty good damage. So my opponent's army is taking pretty heavy losses before the battle starts, but that is very common with Bretonnia when you bring trebuchets and those type of units. So, I'm forming a little bit of a battle line here, and like I told you guys, he has a very wide army, so I'm not going to be able to stop everything, but I just got to hemorrhage the bleeding as much as I can. And unfortunately for me, my memory did serve me not wisely, but correctly, and he did have the Dire Pack back here. So these guys are lining up, they're ready to feast on some poor peasants back here. And I simply just didn't have the resources to defend these guys and defend my front line, so I figured that these cannon crews, it would take the Dire Pack a little while to kill each one, so at least they would get to fire. And for the most part, they've already generated their value, but you can see these poor peasants in here are just going to get feasted on by the Dire Pack, just jumping in there, going ham. So they'll do what they can. What do they actually fight back with? I think they have like little like hammers spears or like pickaxes or something like that. So definitely a miserable matchup. And on that same note, he does get these Cairn Wraiths around the back, and they're just going to tear into these guys, obviously, and terrify them, and they're going to be wavering and routing off pretty quick. But most of the value I wanted out of these, I got, I would say. I mean, still, I think my opponent comes out a little bit ahead here. But on that same note, you also see Manfred flying through here, just getting chased by these two Paladins. So my opponent's having to be very micro-intensive with Manfred. And at the same time, King LOUEN is landing in here. This was a bit of a risky play to land among the Blood Knights, but I figured, you know, they were taking massive damage as I was focusing all the Blood Knights with my Peasant Bowmen here. And I wanted to really just push it home, lower their leadership, and crumble them. I used the Sword of Corone, but my opponent uses an upgraded Invocation of Nehek, which stems the bleeding a little bit. And when he did do that, I decided to pull King LOUEN out and get him out of there. But in, you know, stopping to kind of get into the action with Manfred, Manfred takes an absolute beating from these guys, and he also got caught by the Sword of Corone, which lowers his armor and melee defense even more, so he's just super squishy against these two Paladins. But my opponent does use Doom and Darkness here, which actually starts to rout off a lot of my peasants, so definitely an interesting use of the Lore of Death against Bretonnia, and it actually can be pretty good, and you can see my whole front line is starting to crumble here. So over here I do have some Halberdiers, and these peasants are still shooting into these guys, doing pretty good work, and with King LOUEN's support, these Blood Knights are definitely going to start crumbling and getting worn down soon. But most of my front line is crumbling, like I said. He has a very, very healthy group of Sternsmen here who are just starting to get into my peasants. You know, unfortunately, that front line did collapse with the Doom and Darkness and other abilities there, so they're going to chase those peasants off. But over here, I still have some Halberdiers holding. A lot of his front line of skeletons are crumbling, but unfortunately, my guys are broken as well. So I do land these Paladins over here, and I wanted to save these Peasant Bowmen and these Halberdiers because I had a decent little pocket of troops over here. So I figured if I could land them and kind of deal with the Dire Pack and just kind of serve as a magnet for all of his forces, because I did have some peasant groups that were routing and coming back. And this was a great situation because these peasants were able to get a ton of separation from the main line, and they're going to be able to kind of rain fire in here. And unfortunately for my opponent, he did lose Manfred. I'm sorry I didn't get to show you guys that, but Manfred did get taken out by the two Paladins, and I still have King LOUEN, who is nowhere near his regeneration cap. So he's going to fly around and cause a lot of trouble, and my opponent's going to run into some serious leadership issues, considering I still have two Paladins here who both have potions. So a lot of the Vampire Count's forces are starting to crumble and are going down, and they're all blobbing up here, which is pretty tough. I think he probably should have detached maybe something to, you know, go chase off these peasants. But again, he doesn't really have any really fast units. Maybe the Blood Knights could have rode over there real quick. But now the arrows are starting to rain down on these Blood Knights, and you can see they're taking pretty substantial damage. Two full groups of Peasant Bowmen raining down on these troops is going to, you know, do a lot at the end of the day. Excuse me. Lost my voice at work today. Definitely a lot of yelling. So things are going well here. Mostly the Skeleton Warriors and other troops here are taking a beat down. These Blood Knights are crumbling, and King LOUEN is scurrying around somewhere. I believe I found an isolated group of Graveguard to kind of start working on, so I was pretty happy about this situation. And, you know, he's pretty heavily armored himself, LOUEN. He has about 80 armor. I guess it's not heavily armored, but against these Graveguard, you know, who don't have armor piercing, they're basically just hitting, you know, their swords against a brick wall. So pretty good situation. You see Beaquist here is, I always get that name wrong. Is that actually how you say it? Beaquist? 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 It's kind of a funny one. But the rest of his troops here are crumbling, and even the Sternsmen are in pretty bad shape. They are down to 80 models, but, you know, they're starting to take that missile fire from these routing peasants. And that's something about Bretonnia. If you don't finish off their peasants in that initial push, they're going to come back to bite you. You can see these Halberdiers are coming back from rout. There's also some troops here who are starting to stabilize. These guys are broken, but I believe they are stabilizing. Yeah, it was actually this group right here. So very, very good situation there. And it's kind of just the last stand of the Vampire Counts as everything is starting to crumble. Even these Sternsmen who were just, you know, in, you know, good binding a moment ago are now starting to crumble, and my opponent does indeed leave. So definitely a very good game. A lot of fun playing Bretonnia and just massing peasant hordes and chasing Manfred around the skies for like 15 minutes. Definitely, you know, when you're playing against Vampire Counts against Bretonnia, you really have to make that decision. You either have to go all in on the Air Force, you have to bring Manfred and just, you know, all these flying monsters, terrorgeists and different things to try and contest it, or you got to just go all on the ground. I personally think Vlad is a very good choice against the Bretonnian forces, because he can use the Master of Beguilement on really high value Air Force units like LOUEN and Pegasus Knights. And also on that same note, he can raise dead behind the front line. So you get Vlad in the front line, you use raise dead, and it gets right on top of the peasants. So I think Vlad is a bit of a better choice than Manfred. You know, he's sturdier, can kind of sit in the front line, and, you know, has that fear effect, and it's just a great unit all around. But Manfred has his strengths for sure, but, you know, bringing him on a flying mount is definitely risky against Bretonnia. But my opponent did a really good job keeping him alive for as long as he did, because in many circumstances I could have just, you know, laid the beat down with these Pegasus Knights if he hadn't been very effective at microing them. So very well played on his part. these Blood Knights had a little bit of trouble finding a soft spot, and that was partially because, I didn't bring any cav on the ground, and, he really planned for that. So definitely a lot of these games, like I've mentioned in the past, are won and, lost in many ways in the selection screen. Granted, micro was extremely important in decision making, but still, these Blood Knights were an investment that did not pay off. So anyways, good game to my opponent. I look forward to seeing you again on ladder, and I hope you guys enjoyed that Bretonian cast. Have an excellent night, and take care.